Good afternoon, Sunday afternoon. It's about 3 o'clock, and I am just wrapping up from spending, well, roughly about 3 hours looking all over the internet and watching news television about the Australian election result. It's hung, and not in a grinder kind of way. Well, it looks like it's going to be hung anyway, in that the counting is happening very slowly all of a sudden, but the Liberals don't have a majority yet, so we may yet see a coalition between the Labor Party, the ALP, and the Greens to form government. If they can get some crossbenchers on side, then who knows? Maybe Malcolm isn't going to be our Prime Minister within the next few days. Just to maintain, I think that would be bad news. I think Malcolm is going to make a great Prime Minister if he gets this mandate. Clearly, it shouldn't be ignored that he has been, I won't say pandering, but respecting the far right of the party by not challenging any of the ideas that he clearly holds that are in contrast to the far right's view. But also, I just want to say that in terms of the far right within the Liberal Party and also within the National Party to a certain extent, or probably to the same extent actually, it's not very big, this far right. I am a Liberal voter, and I am quite progressive, and I just want people to know that it is possible to be conservative with progressive values. If anyone is an example of that, it is Malcolm Turnbull in his previous declaration that he is for marriage equality, and also in his previous life, as a campaigner for the Republican movement, which is also a very popular movement on the left side of politics here in Australia. There's a lot of talk already about leadership change within the Liberal Party, which is bullshit. I think if Malcolm isn't able to prevail and lead a government in the next few days, I think he should stay. He'll make a fine opposition leader, and if he's elected again, then he will have a mandate that he didn't have this time. I suppose with that right side of politics, or that far right side of politics within the LNP, and that doesn't mean people that are Nazis or anything like that at all. It basically means people that hold very conservative, for example, Christian views. They are a big part of the conservative movement, but I don't think that we should change leaders, and definitely not back to Tony Abbott if unfortunately the original coalition, as in the LNP, lose this election that happened yesterday here in Australia. Also in that political movement, clearly then, if we look at the other side of politics, Bill Shorten is safe, despite a severe lack of personality and the inability to speak to camera and actually sound like he's not reading from a teleprompter. He actually has built the ALP vote substantially from the last federal election, and clearly people see in him some qualities that I'm yet to identify. And then back to the right, or back to the Conservatives, I was disappointed to read that Wyatt Roy lost his seat of Longman, which is the seat that encompasses Caboolture, basically. And if you don't know, Caboolture is between Brisbane and the Sunshine Coast. So downtown Caboolture, which is not much of a downtown, it's about 40 minutes from the CBD of Brisbane, and almost equidistant from Maroochydore, for example, on the Sunshine Coast. So Wyatt Roy's held that seat for 2 terms in a row. He was Australia's youngest ever parliamentarian elected to a federal government, and he won it twice convincingly. I think he did a fine job. He's a very intelligent young man, and it's a shame. It's Caboolture's loss, or Longman's loss, I should say, that they voted him out. I don't know who the winner is, who the ALP rep is for Longman as of today, but I'm sure she's a great person. I know that she's a woman. I just don't remember her name, and hopefully she can follow in Wyatt Roy's footsteps in terms of making some great outcomes for the people of Longman. The other reason why I think it's a shame is because the disconnect that wasn't really talked about in the federal campaign, because both sides, as in our left and right, don't really know how to deal with it yet, other than the Greens, which are on the far left, is the disadvantage, I suppose you'd call it, of millennials. The fact that it now costs 15 times as much as the annual wage in Sydney to buy a house means clearly housing is unaffordable for young people in Sydney. Whereas when our parents were growing up, it cost them between 3 and in my later years as a child, well, let's just say it cost between 3 and 4 times as much as your annual income for an average house in an average capital city when the values of housing was more equitable across Australia. I think it's a real shame because Wyatt Roy, he's a young man, and yes, he's from the right, so the media didn't really pick up on that or didn't really make a sensation about that, but a really intelligent young man, a voice for millennials, which is now gone. Everybody else in federal parliament is much older than him, and most likely, probably, I can safely guess they're probably all over 30 at least. That generation, which is not my generation, clearly is voiceless in our federal parliament right now. So I think that's a shame, and I hope that people of Longman appreciate what their former member has done for them. In other news on the internet about the federal election, a lot of people are pretty excited that Pauline Hanson appears to have won a seat in the Queensland Senate, or in the Senate, on behalf of the state of Queensland. So there's clearly an instant backlash of hatred towards Pauline Hanson. I think my position on this would be that whenever her maiden speech comes in the Senate, because her last maiden speech is basically why she's famous. She doesn't want Asians swamping Australia. Now she doesn't want Islam swamping Australia. I think we need to listen carefully and use a little bit of respect for what she has to say. Clearly, the people have spoken, and a lot of people are afraid of the growing influence of Islam and how it people are worried about their rights. And yes, these people are on the right primarily, and yes, these people are probably older voters. But it should be remembered, in terms of what she's standing for, she's responding to a need in the community to address Islam bluntly, in the same way that we all addressed Catholicism bluntly in the 1980s and 1990s. It was a champion cause for the media to hack away at the Catholic Church, and more recently, in terms of gloating about the Catholic Church's pedophilia scandals. No one's been ashamed to address that and to ridicule the hierarchy that is, or not the hierarchy, but the institution that is the Catholic Church. Having said that, of course, I respect all people of faith, Catholics and Muslims alike. I think there is a great a great thirst for an Islam reformation. The challenge now is to get people like Waleed Ali in Australia and Susan Carland in Australia and Masjid Nassif, I think his name is, the guy who works with Douglas Murray at the Henry Jackson Institute, to really seriously talk about a reformation of Islam, and let's clean up some of those hadiths that require not just the killing of gays, of course, but also honor killings, and also rules about apostasy, and of course just generally respecting other people's religions as an overarching thing to reform Islam. All these things are critical. Somehow, without altering the Bible, Christians of all faiths have managed to, with a small exception of some far right radical groups like the Westboro Baptist Church, for example, but somehow Christians as a group, all their different denominations, all their different types of Christians, have managed to put on a good front, at least in terms of PR, that we're all God's children, and we respect other people's beliefs. And I think something similar, if it can happen in Islam, would be fantastic. But anyway, this is not a talk about Islam. I just brought that up because of the interesting fact that Pauline Hanson looks like she's going to get a seat in the Senate. Along with the other interesting candidate was Darren Hinch. Looks like he might be a senator. I suppose representing the state of Victoria. I think that's where he's from. And the only thing I can say about that in terms of Darren Hinch and being in the Senate is that, look, we know that he's going to be very effective in Senate estimates questioning, or whatever they call that thing where senators are able to drill down people when they're having an inquiry. He will be fantastic at that, and I look forward to it if he is elected to the Senate, to see some of his questioning when those Senate estimates committees are run, in the next Parliament. Speaking of the Senate, I haven't done a lot of research, but it will be very interesting to see how the chips have fallen in the Senate in terms of whether there is a lot of independents and cross benches, and how that's going to affect passing legislation, which was a bit of a shambles under the last government that the Prime Minister called a double disillusion over, because he couldn't get things through the Senate. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting few days. It's only it's only 3:10 in the afternoon on Sunday, but for some reason, this is the other thing I really don't get. There seems to be a stall in counting. Now, from what I've learned today, like online, some booths are closing counting until Monday. The postal votes haven't been counted yet, and there's 1.5 million postal votes, apparently. I just don't know why there's different rules of counting in different places. I suppose if you're in a small town, people don't want to stay up all night counting the votes, maybe something like that is afoot, or maybe it's the rules, or within our constitution of how votes are counted, and maybe there's some silly rules about closing, between certain hours of the morning if a vote hasn't been decided. Anyway, that's my little rant on the Australian election. As I said, this is personal, so I really hope that the LNP retain government. As a gay, progressive, conservative, I believe that that will be the best position for Australia, and not just for me. It's not about gay rights or anything like that. It's not a selfish position. It's more of a philosophical position. But yeah, I do hope that the Conservatives are returned to power and enjoy the hate. There's a lot of it going around on the internet today. As usual, it's mostly coming from one side. But I'll let you do the research and work out who hates who more. Peace and respect I respect the office of the Prime Minister, whomever may be holding that in Australia soon, whenever they decide. Thank you. Over and out.